Dr. Kyle Landry is a scientist and the president of Delavie Sciences, a company he co-founded with Dr. David Sinclair. Dr. Landry holds a PhD in food sciences from Cornell University. He joined Dr. Sinclair's lab, where his postdoctoral research focused on the use of extremophiles to develop new therapies to prevent and reverse the signs of aging. In collaboration with the government space agencies, Doctors Landry and Sinclair investigated the effects of long-duration space travel on human health. Based on their research, they developed a new skincare product containing Bacillus Lysate, an extract of a bacteria that survived prolonged exposure on the exterior of the International Space Station. Bacillus Lysate is a broad-spectrum UV-absorbing substance that provides a natural alternative to chemicals that may negatively impact human health and the environment. It is the first biological product certified by the Space Foundation. And with that, let me start the interview. Hello, Dr. Landry. You are the co-founder and president of Delavie Sciences. So welcome to Modern Healthspan, and thank you so much for joining us today.
No, thank you so much for having me.
So, Dr. Landry, could you provide a little bit of background on yourself and what led you to kind of found Delavie Sciences with Dr. Sinclair?
Yeah, I'll give you a little background. So formerly, I'm a food scientist. I have a bachelor's, master's, and PhD in food science. And I happened to stumble upon longevity when David gave me a call one day. So one day I'm just in my lab and David gives me a ring and he's like, "Hi, is this Dr. Landry?" I'm like, "Yeah, hi, it's Kyle. How you doing?" And I didn't know who he was, right? Because I'm a food scientist, so I'm in a different field. And to get this call from a Harvard Medical School professor out of the blue was really, eye-opening at the time. And, I didn't know who it was. And he was like, "I read some of your papers and you're the only person in the world who seems to be doing this stuff with extremophiles. Would you want to, do a postdoc in my lab?" And I was like, "Okay, might as well." So he was reading my papers and he saw the connection between extremophiles and longevity, and he plucked me out right after my PhD. And it actually was beneficial because at the same time I was teaching at Boston University. So I am a faculty member in the Department of Health and Rehabilitation Sciences at Boston University. So it made the commute a lot shorter because it's basically, 1 or 2 miles between each other. So that's where it started. And we worked together for some time. We had some patents and we were looking at extremophiles because these organisms, they survive in these really hostile environments. And how can they repair their DNA? How can they thrive in conditions that are normally detrimental to everything else? So we had some cool ideas and thoughts, and we ended up filing a patent, and that led to the formation of a few companies, and Delavie was one that spun out of that. And the concept here was, we have all this really cool science. We have all these really cool functional compounds. How can we bring them to the market or bring them to consumers so they can benefit them right away? And, obviously you would think, okay, let's do drugs, but that's a very, very long pathway, very expensive, time consuming, and you won't see them for 15 years. And then we're thinking, okay, what is something that we can address in the longevity aging space that would have a significant impact that people could see right away? The answer is your skin, right? I mean, people look at you right away. The first thing they notice, or one of the first things, is your skin. And we just happen to have a whole host of things that could benefit skin. And was the concept. So Delavie was created in basically January of 2022. And we launched our first product in October, and here we are.
Excellent. So you said you picked skin as the kind of the target for your company. So can we look at the basics of skin aging? So what causes skin to age? It has internal and external factors. And what are the key kind of drivers of that aging for skin?
Yes. Yeah. So that's a great question. And it's obviously, well, I'll just say it's more obvious than some people think. a lot of people like to dive down and drive down into all these mechanistic things and really try to tease it out. But in reality, the number one driver of skin aging is sun exposure. There's no doubt about it. It's, sun exposure, whether it's UVB or UVA rays, basically cause havoc on our skin for the whole time that you're outside and exposed to the sunlight. And it goes as deep as, single and double strand breaks in your DNA, all the way to cross-linking of collagen and breaking down of hyaluronic acid, which leads to the visible signs of aging. So it's that coupled with environmental factors and your own genetics lead to a combination effect of aging on the skin.
So could you talk a little bit about UVA and UVB and what are the differences and how do they impact the skin?
Yeah, of course. So we actually have, there are three types of UV radiation that we generally like to talk about. There's UVC, UVB, and UVA, right? And UVC is something we don't really experience here on Earth naturally. UVC is wavelength between 100 and 280 nanometers. It's considered short waves, and this is fully dispersed by the Earth's ozone layer. So it doesn't really make it to the surface of the Earth. However, we do generate this on Earth in general, in like germicidal lamps, things that we use for surface decontamination, things of that nature. So you'll see this in hospitals. I mean, even aquariums have UVC lamps to minimize algae growth. So UVC is, prevalent for certain applications, but for skincare, it's not really the main focus. UVA and UVB are the two wavelengths that actually pass through the ozone layer and impact our skin. So UVB is medium wavelength, and that's between 280 and 320 nanometers. And this penetrates the epidermis of the skin and ends up driving DNA damage, hypersensitization, sunburn. And this is what really drives the risk of skin cancer. So you're having these mechanistic impacts where not only are you damaging DNA, but you're also, driving mutations that lead to hyperpigmentation, dark spots, things that you see and are associated with DNA damage. The third one, UVA, are the long waves, and these are between 320 nanometers down to around 400 nanometers. And these penetrate much deeper into the skin, much deeper than UVB. And they penetrate both the epidermis and the dermal layers. And this is what is linked to the visible signs of skin aging. So what this wavelength does is it actually generates free radicals and oxygenative species that promote cross-linking and breakdown of the collagen, elastin, and all the components that are in the matrix aspect of your skin that are responsible for elasticity, firmness, plumpness, and overall integrity. So you get bombarded by those two all the time. And then when you add, urban pollution or environmental factors, lifestyle, other things, they just compound on top of the physical damage that we're experiencing all the time.
So if you were thinking about, like, you want to protect from UVA, UVB, so you're looking for a sunscreen, what would you look for in a sunscreen to be able to identify one that's effective?
So in the United States and, in Europe and around the world, the SPF factor is a number that basically gives you the overall protection rate of the sunscreen against those two, UVA, UVB, and broad spectrum is one that covers both of them. Now, in terms of how the sunscreen works, there are two main classifications. There are the mineral sunscreens, which are based on zinc and titanium. These are considered a more natural or a healthier option per se, depending on what side you're on, because they don't rely on chemical-based UV filters like avobenzone, octocrylene, homosalicylate. So when you look at sunscreens, you either have the traditional UV filter chemical-based ones, or you have the mineral-based ones. And in the United States, it's a little complicated because sunscreen is regulated as a drug. In the rest of the world, or most of the rest of the world, it's a cosmetic. So for the United States, in order to have a sunscreen, you can only use the FDA-approved UV filters. And this is a problem because it limits the number of UV filters you can use to just a handful, where in the EU and the rest of the world, because it's designated as a cosmetic, you have all this really cool innovation, right? All these cool mineral compounds, extracts that are very efficacious. But in order to bring them into the US as a UV filter, you would have to do an IND drug pathway through the FDA. And that's very expensive for a compound that's a race to the bottom ingredient, right? People want to pay the least amount per kilo for the ingredient. So it doesn't really justify the expense of creating a new UV filter drug. But
Right.
yeah, SPF 30 is 30 to 35 is generally good enough for people without pre-existing skin conditions or precancerous lesions. But if you have a history of skin cancer or on the track for that, SPF 50 or higher is what you should look for.
So if you're indoors, or and particularly if you're behind glass, so does glass stop UVs? And if you're indoor in general? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm sitting right here and I'm getting blasted by it. So it'll stop UVC, but UVA and UVB still penetrate. So you will still get this. I mean, there's a great image out there if people want to search for it of a truck driver, and one side of his face is completely wrinkled because that was the side that was next to the glass where he was constantly being exposed to sunlight. So that doesn't necessarily help. You know, so I would still wear it all the time. You know, sunscreen, people think of, oh, I only wear it when I'm outside for a long period of time, or only have to wear it when I'm in the beach. But honestly, general protection of your skin from day one is the best way to minimize the compounding effects of the visible signs of aging that you'll notice when you're in your 40s and 50s, right? So when you look at skincare and sun care, people only seem to react when it's too late, and then they want to reverse it, when if you just simply start in your teens, you will have better skin than you would ever have hoped for in your 40s and 50s.
So if we, so sunscreen is one way of protecting skin health. So what else? I mean, if we're thinking more holistically, what else can we do? And, you know, in particular, what would be a good diet for skin health?
Yeah, so this is actually very interesting. And there's been a lot of buzz lately about the gut microbiome in general. And the skin microbiome is now coming on as well. And this all ties directly to nutrition and skin health. So for example, it's going to sound obvious and very general, but diets rich in colorful fruits and vegetables, which have a lot of phenolic compounds and bioactive compounds that tend to collect in the fatty components or even make it to the dermis. Like, for example, people say if you eat too many carrots, you'll turn orange. Well, you know, there is a little truth to that because the carotenoids, which are antioxidants, end up going to the skin level, and they can absorb any free radicals that are formed from UVA exposure, right? So if you quench the radicals that are formed from UVA exposure, you minimize the damage to your elastin and collagen, and therefore delaying the onset of visible signs of aging. The other thing, very simple, is water, right? Hydration is key, and hydration in the cellular matrix, which is basically in the middle of your layers, will keeps your skin plump. So hyaluronic acid, for example, is a very hygroscopic compound that binds a lot of water and holds it in there. And so do some of the other components in the skin. So if you're constantly hydrated, you're constantly having maximum pressure inside of that matrix that gives you firmness and elasticity and rebound in the skin. And hydration is one people think of oh, I'm sweating. Oh, I need to replenish for my body. Well, if you think about it, when you sweat, you're actually secreting salt, right? And that helps drive dehydration of the skin. So making sure that you're constantly hydrated is not only for your internal organs and your muscles and muscle cramps, but it's also for the skin. And people don't seem to connect that for some reason. And then finally, protein. Collagen is very important. Again, there's a lot of supplements out there for collagen for the skin that helps plump and promote. But honestly, bone broth, even chicken soup, for example, has a high amount of hyaluronic acid and collagen. And it's been, joked around that chicken soup is very beneficial for your skin because it has these functional components. So when you look at foods, honestly, I believe nutrition should come from food. It's a very holistic approach, right? Food is our medicine per se. And if you target or focus foods for certain attributes or effects on your body, it can be very beneficial, much so than supplements. So fruits and vegetables with high pigments, not necessarily potatoes, but carrots and beets and things like that. A lot of phenolic compounds. Protein, chicken, bone broth, anything with a lot of collagen. And then finally, water to help hydrate and plump the cellular matrix.
Would there be foods that you should avoid?
Yeah, so this is another kind of hot topic. So the first one is greasy foods. And, people say if I eat a lot of greasy foods, my grease comes out, I end up getting acne, I have problems. So greasy foods do tend to impact the quality of your skin, not only intrinsically, but also topically. We're messy eaters, right? So the grease that goes in our mouth goes on our face, and that can cause a whole bunch of other issues, whether it's plugging pores, accelerating sebum production, or even changing the skin microbiome, which then leads to acne and boils, a day or two later, can impact that. And then any foods that tend to be pro-inflammation, right? Anything, if you're allergic to anything, that can trigger an immune response, that can also lead to psoriasis or atopic dermatitis or other types of things on the skin that you will not connect to something that you have a mild allergy to, or something that is basically greasy, high fat, or high processed. So it's hard to say because in general, you should be eating those things in moderation, right? Mm-hmm. So hopefully they make a small part of your diet, so the impact would not necessarily be as large. But, if you eat a lot of fast food, if you eat a lot of greasy things, you tend to have skin issues, whether it's inflammation, an autoimmune response, or just plugging the pores. It's a combination of all of those.
Right. So you did say that, food is better than supplements, which I certainly I'm with. But would you suggest any supplements that would be helpful?
Yeah, so this is again, an interesting thing. If you're, for example, a vegetarian or a vegan, right? You have to find different protein sources. So there are some types of protein supplements you can buy that are vegan or vegetarian, and those will help drive collagen, right? Hyaluronic acid or other things that produce conjugated linoleic acid and just general vitamins will help overall complexion and skin. Honestly, I take a multivitamin and fish oil, and it was interesting because, the fish oil tends to be linked to cholesterol and things of that nature, but that too can also help with skin health as you look at that. But, the supplement world, in internal supplements versus topical supplements for skin is like debatable, right? It's like how much of the supplement you ingest actually makes it to the skin and doesn't get burnt by the liver or taken up by something else. So for skincare, I honestly look at skincare as a supplement, right? The topical application of lotion is basically a supplement to your skin, giving it moisture, vitamin E, antioxidants, and other things that it needs. Now, whether it actually penetrates and works in the systemic side and the mechanistic side, that's a whole other question. But vitamins, fish oil, collagen supplements or protein supplements, they will be beneficial.
One kind of topic on this area. So vitamin D, right, is made when UV light hits the skin. So if you're wearing sunscreen, is this going to impact the amount of vitamin D you make, and should you take more because of that?
That people are worried about that, but the vitamin D conversion from the sun it will minimize it a little bit, but it's not significant, right? I think the benefits of minimizing skin cancer outweigh that of the small decrease in vitamin D production. But you could increase your IUs of vitamin D if you want. I mean, if you're taking a multivitamin anyway, or you're drinking milk and stuff like that, and food's fortified with it, it'll be in there. And remember, you don't put sunscreen on your scalp, right? So there are still places on your body that are getting absorbing sunlight where vitamin D can still be produced through the conversion. But that's out there, and people are worried about that. But I would say no, the benefits of sunscreen outweigh any decrease in vitamin D production, if any.
Cool. So do you think gluten has a bad effect on skin?
Yeah, so this again, I think, is more linked to sensitive people with mild or minor sensitizations to gluten, which causes the immune response, which leads to inflammation and eventually can affect your skin overall. And the compounding effect, so like one thing doesn't necessarily trip it. It's a combination of multiple things that get it to a crescendo where you actually have a visible implication. So gluten in general, I don't see any problem with gluten personally as a food scientist. I understand gluten. I understand the chemistry. I understand, it itself is just a protein, but your immune system's ability to interact with gluten is a completely different thing. I mean, it's the same thing with peanut allergies or dairy allergies or soy allergies, right? All these things trigger immune responses, and that can lead to pro-inflammation states that affect the skin.
But you did mention that the gut microbiome has an impact. Do you know, has anyone kind of looked at whether there's prebiotics or probiotics that you could take to improve the gut microbiome that would help with the skin?
Yeah, so in general, the gut microbiome, the whole function and purpose there is to help digest, break down, and produce compounds that basically minimize the growth of harmful organisms and also produce, organic acids and other beneficial compounds, secondary metabolites that help us, right? Now, the skin microbiome is interesting because there are a lot of skin ailments, whether it's acne, atopic dermatitis, psoriasis, that are linked to dysbiosis or changes or negative attributes to the skin microbiome. So, for example, acne tends to be linked to Cutibacterium acnes, which is a specific organism that secretes a bunch of enzymes that leads to boils, lesions, and immune responses and inflammation. Psoriasis and atopic dermatitis are very similar. They're just different types of organisms. And this happens whether it's diet, whether it's genetics, whether it's the environment, even shower water can help or change the skin microbiome. So when you look at cosmetics, what's interesting, and again, I'll step back as a food scientist and I'll tell you my perspective here. I only consider something a probiotic if it's alive, right? The whole function is you eat an organism that's alive, whether it's in yogurt or kombucha, or you eat its spore, like in a supplement, and hope that it germinates and then outgrows. The problem with cosmetics is that a lot of the ingredients that they claim are probiotics are lysates, which means there's no live organism at all in the product. And there's a reason for that, right? When you make cosmetics, one of the main requirements is that it is microbially stable. So no bacteria can grow in it, right? Because if you're putting your finger in there, or you're contaminating it every day. You don't want the bacteria to grow. So the concept of putting live bacteria in a cosmetic that's loaded with preservatives and antimicrobials is counterintuitive. But the consumer doesn't really understand that because they see these advertisements, good for your skin microbiome, contains probiotics or probiotic extracts and things of that nature. It's not the same probiotic mindset as in food, where when you eat yogurt, it's live organisms. When you drink kombucha, it's live organisms. And that's mostly because it's unregulated in cosmetics. There's no real classification or requirement for a probiotic. Now, on the other hand, a prebiotic is something that is more serious, right? And something that can be beneficial, where a prebiotic is something that drives the growth of beneficial organisms, right? So whether it's carbohydrates, like complex sugars, or even selective components that help one organism grow over the other through like selective inhibition or selective outgrowth, that I think is something that is not really explored or even exploited in cosmetics yet. People are still on the probiotic kick, but in my mind, there's no real probiotics in the cosmetics. But for drugs, you can have live organisms. There are tons of patents out there for probiotic uses for skin ailments with live actual organisms, but those are drug applications, not cosmetic applications.